immortality. He identified himself with Apollo, the Greek god of the sun, and adopted a new name, the Sun King. While Louis XIV was securing absolute power at home, he set his sights on the rest of Europe.
Louis XIV was an aggressor in a Europe that France was already the leading power.
To achieve his dreams of empire, the French monarch turned to one of the world's greatest military engineers, Sébastien de Vauban. Vauban showed his brilliance in the battlefield with a revolutionary strategy of attack, the parallel trench method. It would save lives and change the way wars were fought for hundreds of years. 1673. Vauban would put his parallel method of attack to the ultimate test. Under gunfire, at the siege of the Dutch fortress at Maastricht. Vauban stationed Louis's troops along a first trench running parallel to the fort and 600 yards away, out of cannon range. The parallel trenches moved forward until Louis's artillery was near enough to fire breaches in the walls of the enemy fort. His technique worked perfectly. The French troops swarmed through the breaches, overwhelming the Dutch defenders. Vauban's new trench warfare led to victory after victory and allowed Louis to travel to the front lines, hazardous duty for earlier kings.
Vauban offered him the possibility to be the winner at the war. The most beautiful attack of Vauban was the one where the king is here.
Every spring, Louis would lead his army to besiege border towns, taking much of the court with him, including his queen and mistress. Vauban's siege tactics helped Louis expand the borders of France. His defensive genius, building and renovating 300 forts around the country, virtually sealed France off from attack.
In ancient Rome, the geometrical shape that was considered most divine for building was the circle or the square for its precision and symmetry. We call this today the centralized plan. Now, this centralized plan became the inspiration for Vauban to build a fort, except in the shape of a star. But the real genius of Vauban was that he could adapt these forts to any terrain. He could read the valleys and the rivers and the cliffs and build his trenches and moats and walls to maximum effectiveness. He could eliminate blind spots where offenders could hide, at the same time giving the defenders the best vantage points in which to return fire.
What Vauban gave to the Kingdom of France is the fact that during 150 years after him, never the war became inside the territory of France. The war was always outside. That's very good for the king.
But Louis's unchecked spending on hundreds of forts left the country on the verge of bankruptcy. Vauban offered the king a simple solution: tax the nobles, not just the peasants. His treatise was rejected, but the idea would come up again 100 years later in revolution. But for now, Louis XIV was the most powerful monarch on earth. With his European expansion underway, he would set out to dominate the seas with a passage from the Atlantic to the Mediterranean, a passage no one believed could ever be built. The First World War officially ended in 1919 when Germany signed the Treaty of Versailles in the Hall of Mirrors.
Louis XIV tamed nature just like he did empires. He pulled these parks and gardens of Versailles right out of a marsh. He spared no expense in diverting the rivers around Versailles to fill up these 1,400 fountains. But while these fountains were being designed, there was a salt tax collector named Pierre-Paul Riquet who had water dreams of his own. He dreamed of connecting the Mediterranean Sea with the North Atlantic Ocean with a waterway that would cut all the way through France. The influence of France during the reign of Louis XIV was so profound that French became the spoken language amongst the educated of Europe, as well as the language of diplomacy amongst all the European monarchies. But Louis XIV detested dependency upon these monarchies, particularly Spain, for its access from the Mediterranean Sea to the Atlantic Ocean. Well, this tax collector with a dream, Pierre-Paul Riquet, was going to fix that little problem for Louis with the Canal du Midi that would not only connect the Mediterranean Sea to the North Atlantic, but would pave the way for the 19th century Industrial Revolution, when to have a canal would be an absolute must for any country that wanted to make money.
Pierre-Paul Riquet was a young boy when he first heard about the idea of a canal through France that would allow ships to bypass the long sea voyage around Spain. He dreamed about it all his life.
I doubt whether Riquet was very easy to live with, because he was so caught up with this project. He was so, I think it's fair to say, he was obsessed by it. Something in him made him want to build, made him want to achieve something concrete that would go down for posterity.
1662. At age 52, after amassing a private fortune in the lucrative business of collecting taxes for the king, Riquet was ready to step out of his comfortable retirement and step into engineering history. With an ingenious solution to one of the most vexing architectural problems of the century: how to keep the canal filled with water. Riquet discovered a series of rivers that could be channeled to feed the canal at its highest point. But he'd need to control the water flow year-round.
It was going to be dry during the summer. So Riquet understood you needed to get a big volume of water as a reservoir. And the site was found, which was the Saint-Ferréol Dam. And that was absolutely spectacular. That was the key to the whole project.
A reservoir. It was a stroke of genius. Riquet had solved the dilemma that no one could before him. There was just one small problem. To supply the canal with enough water, he would have to build the largest dam the world had ever seen. It would stand 105 feet tall and have a thickness of more than 450 feet. Behind it, a 2 billion-gallon artificial lake. The Bassin de Saint-Ferréol would collect water from several sources. It may have looked good on paper, but there was only one man in the world with enough money to foot the bill for Riquet's bold project. To get to the king, Riquet had to find a way to his all-powerful finance minister, Jean-Baptiste Colbert. He sketched out his blueprints and presented them to Colbert. Colbert instantly recognized its potential to provide revenue and fatten the nation's coffers. The next step was to convince the king, who liked the idea. The canal would be a grand project worthy of his reign.
Louis XIV acutely realized the potential of architecture to establish an image that would embody not only his personal authority and status, but also that of the Kingdom of France that he ruled.
Even so, Riquet had to stake his own savings to pay for 1/3 of the project before Louis would give his approval. In 1666, without any background in engineering, Riquet threw himself into the daring task of building his massive canal. He began construction of the Saint-Ferréol Reservoir, which would take 4 years to build. While work on the reservoir and feeder system was underway, the first stones were laid for the canal itself in Toulouse on November 17, 1667. By January 1668, 2,000 laborers were already at work. At the peak of construction of the canal, Riquet had a labor force of 12,000, including 600 women, due to a shortage of manpower. To ensure a large and reliable workforce, he paid well above the going rate, provided affordable housing, and even gave vacation and sick days.
He introduced an early form of social security. You know, there was such a thing as paid leave, which was absolutely unheard of at that time. So he was well ahead of his times, but he had to be able to implement the project in a decent time.
It wasn't long before Riquet's massive engineering project and generous labor policies began to draw criticism. Opponents of the canal accused Riquet of wasting public money for his own glory on a project that was doomed to fail. Even Colbert began to have doubts. In 1677, 10 years into construction, the project reached a crisis as the canal approached the southern slope of the Enserune Ridge. Riquet proposed a daring new idea. He would build the world's first tunnel for navigation, and he would do it with explosives. When word of Riquet's plan reached Paris, Colbert panicked. He ordered all work on the canal stopped until a panel of experts could investigate. Thumbs up, and Riquet's lifelong dream would be realized. Thumbs down, and decades of hard work would go down the drain, and Riquet's fortune would be wiped out. The guillotine was promoted by Dr. Guillotin, but built by Tobias Schmidt, a German harpsichord maker. 1677, the Canal du Midi in the south of France, one of the greatest engineering feats in history, is on the brink of disaster. After 10 years of tireless effort, Pierre-Paul Riquet risked losing everything. When word reached Paris that Riquet planned to tunnel through a ridge of mountains, Minister of Finance Jean-Baptiste Colbert ordered all work stopped, pending an investigation into what he thought was an impossible idea: using explosives to build the world's first navigable tunnel for a canal. Riquet's life work and personal fortune hung in the balance.
Colbert said, "We just don't believe you're going to succeed in this." And so Riquet, the story is that he increased the numbers of men and women working on the job, and that by the time the inspector came, I think it was 2 weeks later, they'd been able to get cut through and provide proof that the tunnel was feasible.
For 15 years, Riquet had faced every conceivable obstacle, natural and man-made, to build his beloved canal. But now at 76, he was exhausted.
On October the 1st of 1680, Riquet, gravely ill, called his son to his bedside and asked, "Où est le canal?" Where is the canal? His son responded that it was only about 3 miles away from the sea. Riquet passed away. The canal was opened 8 months later, 8 months too late for his creator to see it.
On May 15th, 1681, the Canal du Midi opened for business.
Canal du Midi is a masterpiece. The solution for transport by water in France is the best solution still today. And the Canal du Midi shows the way.